Tonight, as we've seen in the last lessons, particularly since the Old Testament histories ended, but not the Old Testament prophecies of these times, we saw the great changes that took place in the intertestament period. The Greeks, their culture and the effect on Judaism, giving the Jews, most of them at least, a new language, and in those times, the development of the synagogues. Then we saw the Maccabean revolt at the provocations, continual provocations of the Greek, Gentile, pagan rulers who had no respect for the law. The revolt that brought about, and for about 100 years, the independent Jewish state. At the end of it, a kingdom, for most of it, a tetrarchy. I'm not sure what the difference between sometimes some of these ancient Greek titles, ethnarch, tetrarch, king, and the like, I'm not sure about all the distinctions, but toward the end they actually were, the rulers were considered kings. Then the Romans came, and we studied about that in the beginning of this lesson, and with them, their rulers, the Herods. We'll have one more lesson, and as we see, we really are New Testament introduction here rather than Old Testament conclusion when we come to these last and final lessons, as we have the people hoping for a time of independence again, many of them, particularly the Zealots, other developments in Jewish culture and life that are important as settings for the New Testament. That'll be in our concluding lesson 26 to follow. In this lesson, the key points: we saw the great kingdom of Rome that God had told was coming. And so God's control over kings and kingdoms, certainly at a minimum, at a bare minimum, knowing what they'll do, but obviously we understand so much more than that in his governance of the world by his unseen hand, but mighty hand at the same time. So it was well prophesied through Daniel. This fourth kingdom was coming, and we saw it prophesied in various ways as part of the strength of it in the prophecy that Nebuchadnezzar saw in a dream, the legs of iron of the great statue, but also its brittleness, the feet of iron and clay. We saw it as a terrifying beast that had dominion. It was dreadful and terrifying. Daniel said in Daniel 7, it came to devour. One of the pictures of the beast is as a great bear with iron claws, as though we need to armor the bears. But a great bear with iron claws and ribs in its mouth. And so it's been feasting. And so this is the strength and the dominating character of the Romans. And something that's greatly important for New Testament times is the persecution that they do of the saints. Daniel saw this fourth kingdom as one who would wage war with the saints, overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And a time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. This beast would be speaking out against the Most High, and he would wear down the saints of the highest one. And so Daniel really foresees the battles, the conflicts, and the beast that'll be in the book of Revelation. And so Daniel just didn't see through the intertestament period, which we've gone to him repeatedly for the outline of these things. Daniel sees into the church. Daniel sees the persecution of the church by this great empire. And if these things had a fulfillment in literal historical events tied to the Roman Empire, then my understanding of these prophecies of Daniel is that Daniel, of course, sees the Messiah in the prophecy of the 70 weeks, and he probably sees another 200 years past that. I really think Daniel foresees all the way up to basically the making Christianity legal in the Roman Empire. And then, of course, the Roman Empire becomes, it's a corrupted version of Christianity, isn't it? But doesn't the Roman Empire almost become an agent of Christianity? And then, of course, we know that that develops into the corruptions of the Catholic Church and the like. But certainly the kingdom, things tilt in favor of the saints, and the kingdom is delivered to the saints. And so today, what remains of the Roman Empire? In many ways, the Roman Catholic Church. And so in any case, this was all foreseen by Daniel. So we talked about Rome's expansion. We gave a brief history lesson of Rome. And again, not so that you would know Roman history and be able to do well on the exam for that, because there is no final exam coming up on Rome. But we talked about Rome's character and its development and how that development played into its character, because the character of the Romans and how they deal with subjugated people, particularly the Jews, is of great interest to Bible students and great interest to those who study the church. And so we talked about the characteristic of Rome is almost a paranoid view of security, making sure that the Italian heartland, the heart of Rome, the areas right around Rome, were as secure and prosperous as possible. And we talked about the fact that they had been threatened, even almost at the time of the Maccabean revolt, that late in the intertestament period. Rome did not have a large empire, was barely a city-state. And when Hannibal invaded the Italian peninsula, he and his armies were in the field, fighting Roman armies, marauding around the countryside for 15 years. Now, you just think about if we had a foreign army invade the Great Plains and just roam between the Mississippi and the Rockies for 15 years. Would that have a bit of an impact on the development of the country going forward? I think it might. Would that scar the psyche a bit? I think it might. And so we talk about those things from the perspective of the Romans and their fanatical devotion to internal security. And the way to make Rome secure was to fight all their enemies as soon as they found them, as far away from Rome as possible. And so that takes them on this rapid expansion into Palestine as they conquered the Greek kingdom, what was left of it up in Damascus. That put them right on the border, on the north border of Palestine. And it also, they were, had designs for a long time on conquering Egypt, which was the southern border of Palestine. About 50 years after they took over the Jewish kingdom, they took over Egypt. And so Jerusalem and Palestine are viewed as an integral part of the Roman Empire. And when people inside the Roman Empire proved themselves to be ungovernable, when they proved to not live peaceably and pay their taxes, the Romans always gave swift retribution. And one thing I have to say, and it's one reason why at times despotic and totalitarian governments do not like Bible-believing people, is that in a lot of ways, and the long history of both Jews and Christians alike will point this out, the people of God's holy book aren't real good at being oppressed. They just aren't. They're a very stubborn, independent lot that think there's an authority that's higher than the government, that think that the government should be curtailed in what it tells them that they should do, and that when the government issues them various edicts about how they will behave and what they will do, at times the people who believe in the book of God prove stubbornly resistant to following what the kings and authorities and totalitarians tell them to do. And I think it's a feature. I don't know if it's a bug or a feature, but it's one or the other. And the people who follow God's book, like I say, they don't make very good serfs. They just don't. Look at how the totalitarian governments through the centuries have persecuted the Jews, and look at how totalitarian governments, even to this very day, how they persecute Christians. And this independent streak, I'm not saying it's all complementary. It's not. It's not entirely complementary, but it is definitely a feature. But in many ways, it is complementary, and it works well with self-government as long as people are restrained enough to do it. But in any case, that brought the Jews, and then later brings the Christians into conflict with this hyper-paranoid and extremely powerful world empire. It just brought the Jews at times and brought the Christians also many times into conflict with the Romans and also other states like that through the centuries. Matt?
Well, I was going to say, Christians at least should be in a lot of ways above nationalism. And I mean, like, we should be excellent servants and even humble serfs if need be, as long as they're not commanding us to violate God's commandments.
Right.
I mean, they could, I mean, I think a lot of the churches in China are doing that. They're not actively trying to overthrow the government, but they are stubbornly persisting
Right.
that they're insisting that there's a higher authority than the communist government. And that's what the early church did under Rome.
That's right.
They weren't storing weapons and planning a revolution. They were saying, okay, press all you want, we're still going to follow God.
That's right. And they grew through the persecutions, eventually to the point that Christianity, as an illegal religion, in the year about 320 BC, Christianity as an illegal religion had about 20 to 25% of the Roman population following it. 20 to 25% of everybody in the Roman Empire was a Christian, and it was still illegal. And then the emperor's mother converted. And then a few years later, the emperor converted. And it made a huge difference in the way the Christians were treated. But throughout history ever since, there has been this oftentimes often conflict between the people who follow God's instructions and the governments that lead them, especially if those governments form some kind of overreach. And as Matt says, as long, because our instruction is to follow to the degree, then follow conscientiously, follow as if they have authority from God, because that's what the book says they have, until they tell us to do things that the book tells us otherwise. And these governments, especially the Romans, as an example, communists make a great example today, and many different kinds of totalitarian and absolutist rulers in between, they almost always start getting into things where it conflicts with Christian duty to follow these leaders, because these worldly leaders don't have the restraint that they should, and it ends up being a thing of conflict. So the Jews in this period, and I think we would have to say it was by rebellion, because they were not just rebellious to the Romans, but they were rebellious to God, and they killed the Messiah during this period. So it tells you, what kind of rebellious people you got, that they killed the Messiah, right? So they are rebellious people, and the Romans come down hard upon them just shortly after this period we're talking about. So the Romans take over in 63 AD. The Romans take Jerusalem, and it's one of the few times where there's a record of any Gentile going into the temple. Roman General Pompey went into the temple in 63 BC when Rome took over administration of this territory. The next pagan who goes in the temple is who? It's Titus in 70 AD. In 70 AD, Titus goes in there as the thing is burning to the ground. And so the rebellious period, this rebellious period of the Jews corresponds with this hammer of an empire that takes them over and has this paranoid obsession with internal security and people following their rules. And the Jews of these generations, they're not following God's rules, much less the Romans' rules, are they? And so meet the iron legs, right, of the statue of Daniel 2. And, it happens there. So we talked about how these things, this Roman mania for security and expansion, and in this heading you see it into Judea, which is, there's your Latin spelling of Judea. This also, well, I've said Palestine a couple of times. Palestine and Judea are basically used even back as far as Roman times. So before the time of Christ, the Romans were using Judea and Palestine as interchangeable words. And so today people will often refer to that area with both these names. And sometimes the Jews will say Israel, and the Palestinians and the Arabs will say Palestine. But we've had this double vocabulary for this place all the way back to Roman times. So if I say one or the other, it's not political. It's just they're both there. Okay, so Herod the Great. Last time we talked about at the end of this independent Jewish kingdom, there was these two brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, both of them the second. Hyrcanus the second was the king. He'd been the high priest before, and then he became the king and the high priest. His younger brother Aristobulus, who turned out to be the more energetic, the more ambitious, probably the brighter one of the two, he wanted all of his brother's accolades, and he wanted his brother's positions. They fought a civil war for several years. It got to the point where Hyrcanus, the only part of the temple that only part of Jerusalem, or only part of the whole kingdom that he controlled was the Temple Mount. His army was holed up in the temple. Of course, he's a priest. And so they kept the sacrifices. They had the sacrifices the whole time. His brother Aristobulus, they had a siege wall going through Jerusalem and around the outside. And for a couple of years, this is the last couple of years of Jewish independence, which just tells you, how ungovernable these people seem to be. The king was holed up in the temple while his brother had a siege army and a siege around the temple, running through various neighborhoods of Jerusalem. And when Pompey took over with Roman authority in Damascus, both brothers sent to the Romans and said, hey, come down here and help us. Come be on my side, get rid of my wicked brother. He's doing all these things wrong. At the same time, the Sanhedrin Council, and this is one of the first records of them that I have found. There are probably some more a little bit earlier. But the Sanhedrin Council also sent a delegation to the Romans saying, come get rid of both of these jokers and let us rule basically by local elders, like kind of the synagogue organization. Let us have local elders to rule the country. And the Roman general said, I'll come down, I'll help everybody. And I've got a solution for who gets to rule this place. Guess what his solution was? I'll rule it, thank you. So Pompey came down and said, I'm in charge now. And basically nobody fought him. They were tired of the fighting. They knew they couldn't fight the Romans. And so Hyrcanus was taken off to Rome, and he was going to be put in the triumph and led through the streets as captive. When he got there, he ended up talking to some important Roman people, and he started building a political group that would support him going back to take over. Aristobulus said, I'm in charge now. I'll be your loyal man I'll be your loyal ruler for Rome. And one of Hyrcanus's advisors, a guy named Antipater the Idumean, who was married to Nabaton, which is an ancient word for basically an Arab. So a guy from Edom whose wife was an Arab, he said, look, these guys are all unworthy. I'll be your loyal guy in Rome. And he's the guy that they got chosen. And so Antipater, the Idumean, who's married to an Arab, he becomes the guy who is in charge of Jerusalem for the Romans. And so, and of course, we know Antipater mostly as being Herod's father. And so Antipater was able to he was made procurator. Procurator, because that's lower than proconsul. So he was made procurator for the area. He got his son Herod and his other son Philo, I forget. It's not quite, maybe it's Faisal. He got that son to be a governor in Galilee. He got his son Herod to be the governor in Jerusalem. And after just a short while of being in charge of the kingdom that he had helped run, but now he's in charge of it for the Romans, he got poisoned. And then Herod used his political skills, a very young man, Herod used his political skills to get the position of his father. And so Herod was made Roman procurator for Jerusalem, and then eventually for all of Judea. He marries into that royal family of the Jewish nobles who had been the kings before. So he marries a lady named Miriam, which is the first one of his wives named Miriam. There's another one as well. So the first Miriam is one of this Jewish royal family. Her grandfather had been the high priest. And Herod is off and running. Herod shows great loyalty to the Romans and quite a bit of skill in governance, as well as political skill. Eventually, the Roman Senate just says, you know what, Herod, we're going to make you the king. And so Herod was made the king of Judea. And so we'll talk about Herod in the Bible stories in a minute, but these will make more sense of the Bible stories and be a background for those. Herod knew that his power depended on the Romans, and he was always extremely loyal to the Romans. And he also went on a massive building project, not just one or two things, but many. So what's the most famous thing that Herod builds? He builds a temple. And how long does that take? There's a mention in the scripture that they've been working on it 46 years. It's not just the temple he builds this massive tower, the fortress beside the temple, and he names it the Tower of Antonia after a Roman leader in their honor. He also builds a massive brand new city as a seaport for Judea, because Judea didn't have very many good seaports. So he builds a massive city with an absolutely massive artificial harbor. And we know that city, especially in the book of Acts, don't we? Caesarea. And so he builds the city of Caesarea. Of course, he named it after Caesar. And so it's known in history as either Caesarea Maritima, so maritime Caesarea, the seaport, or it's also known as Caesarea Palestinia, because like with the Greeks who ruled from Damascus, how many cities did they build that ended up being named Antioch? So you have to specify which Antioch are we talking about. So when the Romans take over, we have to specify which Caesarea do you mean? Because there's a bunch of Caesareas. And so this was Caesarea Maritima or Caesarea Palestinae. He also built a massive fort just south of Jerusalem called Herodium. Basically, he built on a mountain plateau. He built a massive hilltop fortification, and he also built another one farther down near the Dead Sea in a little bit more inhospitable place, which is known as Masada. And so, in the Jewish rebellion, it's one of the most famous places, and I think most of us probably know the story of Masada eventually, right? The Romans built this massive ramp to get up to the top of a mountain. And just as they break the walls, they found out that all the defenders basically, I think there was a few children, maybe, and a woman or two, but basically everybody who'd taken refuge in the fortress had committed suicide. And so but Herod builds three massive fortresses that we know of by name: the Tower of Antonia, the Herodium, and Masada. Now, do you let rulers you don't trust build massive defensive fortifications? If you don't trust a ruler, what do you let them build? Not much, right? So the fact that he's able to pull off building cities, seaports, technically innovative and colossal by every standard of the time, forts. When you let somebody in your one of your vassal kings build state-of-the-art forts, you must trust him, right? So the Romans, this is the amount of trust that the Romans had with Herod. Unfortunately, though the Romans trusted him, and to the degree he trusted anybody, he trusted them, Herod was, throughout his life, and the longer he ruled, and he ruled for about 40 years, the longer he ruled, the more paranoid he got. And so he had 10 wives, so he had lots of children. He killed about half of them, most of them in their early 20s. Most of them that seemed to be a favorite age of him to kill his children, because that's just about the time he got to thinking, maybe they're going to try and take my throne. And remember, what had happened to his dad? He'd been poisoned. And so Herod thinks people are trying to kill him. Now, were there probably people trying to kill him? I'm sure. But, his paranoia ran deep. He killed several of his wives. He killed a number of his sons in particular. He killed anybody who he thought might be able to take his throne or was wanting to take his throne. And so at the end of his life, he was especially capricious and paranoid. And he dies about 4 years or so after Jesus is born. Well, what's one of the things we know this Herod from in the Bible? He kills the babies. And we think, well, what kind of monster kills the babies? This monster Herod, who kills his own sons. And so, in one of the most famous stories about Herod is when he was on his deathbed, there was this delegation from Jericho who had come to see him about something or other. And he basically had all of them seized, and he had them held captive in an amphitheater. That is another thing that Herod built all over Judea. He built amphitheaters. He built these big Greek theaters. And so nearly, it's like half of them or so. It's a massive number of the ones that still exist, any remnants of, he built. But in one of these theaters, he had this delegation of Jericho under guard, and the orders were, when you hear I'm dead, kill them all. And he said that it was so that when his death was announced, people would grieve. Because he pretty well understood what's going to happen when his death is announced. People are going to cheer and celebrate. And so he wanted people to grieve at his death. When he did pass away, the guards who held those men from Jericho, they did not kill them. They said, we're not doing that.
If you run into an atheist who knows a few things, they sometimes will point out the murder of the innocents at Bethlehem is not recorded anywhere in secular history. But if you have a better understanding of Herod, him murdering a few dozen babies in a small village, that wouldn't even make the top 10 of this.
Oh, no, not even. It might not even make the year in review, right, that particular year. I one time saw somebody do the numbers. City of Bethlehem, I think, was it 4,000 or 5,000 people?
I don't even think it was that big. I recently read it would have been a few, at most, a few dozen babies.
Yeah, I think the highest number I've ever seen of anybody running the numbers is under 50. So it's just slow day at the abortion clinic. Maybe not. Okay. No, but it is a terrible thing, and it's an atrocity. But right, in the scheme of things that this man did, the killing the innocents, one small village, one time really is just. It's not that. It doesn't make his list of bad behavior is just absolutely lengthy. It's really absolutely lengthy. So now again, he leaves behind, as far as things you can identify on a map and things you can go take pictures of this day. He probably leaves behind more than any other ruler of this period, or just about any period in Jewish history. The amount of things that you can walk up to and go, Herod built that, Herod built that, Herod built that. One of the things that he did was, as far back as Hezekiah's day, there's mention in the Old Testament about them building waterworks under the city of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is on a mountaintop. Now, normally, if you're on a mountain, where do you get water? So there's a couple of springs, but if you don't have the access to those springs, you're in trouble. And so they built some underground passageways hewn out of the rock. And so they I can't imagine that by our standards, ancient picks would have been a really good, quality tool. But with ancient picks, from Hezekiah's day on, they are building waterworks under the city of Jerusalem. There's a reference in the time of David where somebody goes through some natural caverns to enter the city. And so there was already something there, but this is greatly expanded a couple of times. And that's one of the things that Herod did, was he greatly expanded the water supply system, and it greatly expanded the capacity of these underground passageways to take water from one place to the other. And he builds public pools all over the city. So no matter what neighborhood you're in, it's a short walk down to these pools. And so I think there may be one or two of those where some of the pieces of the pools are still mentioned. But through the Gospels, there's several mentions of pools in Jerusalem. And also, one of the things that, Matt mentions objections, people, they baptized 3,000 people. And they go, where do you baptize 3,000 people? Well, they had these massive public pools just outside of the temple. Of course, they also had these portable stations for cleaning and bathing the animals, which if the priest would have let them, they could have baptized a whole lot of people in those. But they wouldn't have needed it. There's all these public pools within an easy walk of the temple to do that. So Herod did that. So massive numbers of things that Herod built, a lot of them, the ruins of which still exist. So as far as projects go, building goes, he's Herod the Great, no doubt. When it comes to influence, when it comes to, prestige and power and all of those things, he's Herod the Great. Now, when it comes to, treatment of people, what's the assessment of moral folks ever since he, from his own day on, he's Herod the Terrible, right? And so just because you build really good things and just because you're really powerful and the like doesn't mean you're good. But he really deserves, if anybody does in that time and place, deserve the moniker as a vassal king, the title Herod the Great. It really is this guy. And so that is our first Herod. Questions or additional comments on that? Okay, so then we get the other Herods. And so we have a whole bunch of sons of Herod. There's 4 of them. Let me just put their whole set of names up here. There's 4 sets of Herods, of his sons, 4 of his sons, who are important to the Bible story. And I don't know why he had 2 sons named Philip, any more than he had 2 wives named Miriam, but he did have 2 sons named Philip. All right, so the first one is a guy named Herod Archelaus. So Archelaus, and he is the ruler that after Herod's death took over the area around Jerusalem, and Bethlehem, is a suburb of Jerusalem. He is the Herod that Joseph feared living under, and so Joseph does not return to Bethlehem. Joseph returns to Nazareth. And so Archelaus makes a brief appearance in Scripture. There's not a lot of details of the gospel story from, there's a whole lot of Jesus' birth, and then there's not a whole lot until he's 30. So we have this, the Gospels get this factual start and factual setting and historical setting, and then it's a while before we have more. So if the Bible had a bunch of stories and histories recorded during this time, I'm guessing we'd probably have a few atrocities from this guy too. But the only thing we have in the scriptures of him is that Joseph feared him and wouldn't move to his territory. Then the first Philip, we don't know him because of his rule, because he did not get territory to rule. The first Philip, though, makes an appearance as in Scripture as Herodias' first husband. Because what was the simple message of John the Baptist about the guy, about Herod Antipas? What was the simple message about that guy and his wife? not lawful for you to have your brother Philip's wife. And so the first Philip just makes an appearance only as the husband of Herodias. From the secular histories and what's told about this family is the fact that he doesn't end up with rule. He doesn't end up as a king or an ethnarch or a tetrarch or any kind of arch at all. That seems to be one of the reasons why she leaves him, because he doesn't end up with any kind of office. All right, so that is Philip. We also might mention that Herodias is, as you might guess, if her name is Herodias, who's she related to? She's related to Herod. She was a niece to Philip. So she's a granddaughter of Herod the Great. And so Herodias, the woman involved, she also is a Herod. Of course, she's also the mother of Salome or Salome, I don't know how you want to say that. And then that Philip, the one who doesn't rule, he's the father of that girl. So the girl who dances and ends up asking for John the Baptist's head, she's a great-granddaughter of Herod by one side of the family, and she's a granddaughter of Herod by her daddy's side. And so those are all Herods. Then there's Herod, the Tetrarch. He gets a brief mention in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. And he's the Tetrarch. In the scriptures, he's just said to be Herod the Tetrarch. He is the Tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, which are areas both just north and west of Palestine. If you really care about your Roman political map, you can look that up. So there's that Philip, Philip the Tetrarch. And he's not mentioned in the Bible except for the scene setting and to say this was the ruler of this place when these events happened. He is later important to at least to some people, not in the Bible story again, but he ends up marrying Salome, the one who asked for John the Baptist's head. So he ends up marrying her. And at this point, try to keep your genealogical tables straight and diagram these things. She would later marry a cousin, another one, that Salome would. She would later marry a fellow named Aristobulus, which is a name in the Herod family, but a name borrowed from that Jewish royal family of before, because again, they were intermarried. But she would later marry Aristobulus of Chalcis, who was a cousin. And one reason I bring her up, again, these are all real historical figures. We have coins that have her image as an adult on there. So when we run across the young girl who dances and asks for John the Baptist's head, when she is an adult, because of her second marriage to a cousin, just outside the Bible lands, not far, she makes a coin that we found copies of that coin. So we have an idea of what she looked like as an adult lady. One more son of this generation, and then we'll pause because the time has got away. Herod Antipas. He is the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. He would later marry, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. I'm going to have to double check that. I've got Salome. I'm going to have to double check which one Salome ended up with. I think it may have been the other one. In any case, there was one more Herod who ruled. He's the one who shows up at the trial of Jesus. So Herod Antipas, he's the one who married Herodias. Herod Antipas marries Herodias. He's the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. Galilee, the Bible lands, Perea just north of there. He's the Herod who gets to be at Jesus' trial. He's the Herod who shows up a couple other times. And so Herod the Great's sons, three of them, there were many, three of them are rulers. One of them makes the story as jilted husband. And so quite the legacy of the first generation after Herod. But we got 2 more generations to go, and the story stays just about as juicy. And so we got more Herods to come. And so they definitely through all of it, these Herods have almost always the undying loyalty of Rome. And so you wonder, how could these corrupt people, how could they stay in power? Well, the Romans from far away, they liked them. They did what the Romans wanted.